issued orders to Hoover, and Hoover turned around and relayed those orders to various people in the big cities. And New York was Roy Cohn territory. And if Meyer Lansky and Hoover wanted to get rid of a politician, they would tell Cohn. And usually they would find a way to do it without killing the guy, but not always. So Cohn is a real sleazeball. He was a pedophile. He exploited little boys. He died of AIDS, of course. And Cohn is the man who created Donald Trump. Trump was a nobody, really, until Roy Cohn came along and made him a somebody and set him up. And so they put Trump in the hotel and gambling business. And gambling, of course, is money laundering. That's the way you make the majority of your money if you run a gambling operation, is through laundering money. People come in there with big stacks of money and they buy chips, and then they cash in their chips and they get the money, they walk out. Now they've got laundered money. So gambling is perfect for that, and hotels are also notorious for that. So Trump has essentially been an organized crime money launderer for his entire career. And then after he launders a whole bunch and stashes it away, he goes bankrupt and then he starts again. That's what he's done. That's what his job was before he became a reality TV host and then a reality TV host in the White House. This is the guy who's going to drain the swamp. He's owned by the Kosher Nostra. And look at Jared Kushner, Kosher Nostra princeling, who's been running his Middle East policy. We've never had a country that's been less America first, right? Trump says he's America first, and the people drinking his Kool-Aid think he's America first. America is last right now. Israel is issuing all of the orders. They've always had too much power, but never more so than under Donald Trump. So Trump is a complete joke. Why these people think that just because Trump has a big mouth and says all these things, he refers to the conspiracy theories, this and that, puts out crazy tweets, that means he's going to solve any of these problems, or he's an honest man? I don't think so. Trump's just a loudmouth, braggart, narcissist with ADD who has an itchy Twitter finger, and he never accomplished anything except turn the whole country over to Bibi Netanyahu. And so what these people think that they're doing when they're supporting Trump, I have no idea.
And everything that he said he's going to do, he actually does the opposite.
Yep.
It's just amazing. But I ask you that because so many people, and I look on the internet and they're talking about how Trump is going to do this, even with this, USA Watchdog. And they were, all of their reports, they're talking about Trump this, Trump that. And I had a guest on my show, Mr. Gregory Mannarino, who is an economic guru, and he used to do a lot of interviews with them. And he said they fell out over Trump because they were U.S. Watchdog was believing the Kool-Aid of Trump so much that Trump is actually turning friends against each other and family against each other. And it's just amazing to me that people won't even look into his history to see how much of a thug he is and how much of a liar he is and how he has rubbed elbows with all of the corrupt, from Hillary Clinton to Bill Clinton to the pedophile that was murdered not too long ago.
Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah.
Who didn't hang himself?
So, I mean, what do you say about this atmosphere of Trump lovers? And also, when you touch on that, also so that people know that we're not one-sided, touch on this Joe Biden stuff also.
Yeah, I think that Trump was very refreshing in the way that he did raise various kinds of taboo issues, at least. And so people were so amazed and happy that here's Trump, blaming George Bush for 9/11, right? And, he's on record. Trump is on record saying he knew that bombs were used to destroy the World Trade Center. He said that on September 11, 2001. When he was running in 2016, he knocked Jeb Bush out of the primaries by saying that George Bush was responsible for 9/11. And all of us in the 9/11 truth community thought that was pretty cool. I mean, who ever heard of a politician say something like that? He knocked Ted Cruz out of the Republican primaries by saying that Ted Cruz's father, Rafael Cruz, was implicated in the JFK assassination, which is probably true. And so that was amazing. And so a lot of us in the red pill community said, hey, wow, Trump is saying these things that you're not allowed to say. That's really cool. And so Trump has said all kinds of stuff like that. Some of it true and some of it cool and some of it not so true and not so cool. But I think that really got people excited, and they said, yeah, here, this guy's different. He can talk about these things that nobody else can talk about. And he's kind of a nationalist, and he wants to put America first, or he says he does anyway. And so these people basically took him at face value. They didn't look beneath the surface. And if they had, they would see that Trump Tower is the North American headquarters for the Russian mafia, which has taken over organized crime. There's a book called Red Mafia by a guy named Friedman, who was actually murdered for writing the book. And this book, Red Mafia, shows how in the 1990s, the old Kosher Nostra, run by people like Meyer Lansky, was taken over in a hostile takeover by Russian Jews. And what happened was that the U.S. had pressured the Soviet Union to release the Jews and let them leave and come to America and Israel. And so the Russians emptied their prisons of the criminal Jews. See, at that time in the Soviet Union, the only way you could make money was as a criminal, because it was illegal to make money. Capitalism was illegal. So, but of course, there was prostitution and gun running and gambling and all that stuff. So somebody was making money, and guess what? It was the ethnic Jewish crime networks that were making the money. And so when the U.S. said, well, release the Jews of the Soviet Union, the Russians said, okay, and they opened the prison doors and sent them here. Sort of like the Cubans did at one point, too. So anyway, so these Russian mafiosi come over to New York, and they're nasty. I mean, these people learned their stuff in the Gulag, and they're just really hard-nosed characters, and they took over a lot of American organized crime. And so that Russian mafia then ended up taking over the money laundering business that Trump is involved in. And so that's why, to this very day, the headquarters of the so-called Russian mafia, which is really the Jewish-Israeli Russian mafia, is Trump Tower. But nobody looks at that. Everybody just kind of sticks with the surface and doesn't peel back, the surface to look at what's crawling around underneath.
Before you go into the Joe Biden, let me ask you this: do you think that some of the people are on the Trump bandwagon because he is speaking to white people that sees America no longer being predominantly white, and they're feeling threatened or whatever? Do you think that that's a main reason why a lot of those people are attracted to Trump?
Absolutely, and it's not just that they're afraid that America won't be white. I think that's part of it. That's a big part of it. But I think they're losing a lot more than that, because when you get right down to it, these kind of folks, and I mean, I live among people like this. I'm out in this rural area in Wisconsin, where there are the trailer parks nearby and stuff. And a lot of these folks feel like they're losing their country, and it isn't just the racial thing. It's what they're also losing, really, is they're losing their ability to make a decent living and support their family. That's actually what's got them more worried personally. And then they're also worried about the decline of manners and morals. They're worried that a lot of them are disturbed that today, everywhere you go, somebody's hyping transgender this, transgender that. Their kids are being brainwashed in school that all kinds of deviant sexuality is perfectly cool. Yeah. That maybe you're a boy who thinks he's a girl or whatever. That's cool. Maybe you're in the wrong gender, and we can fix that with surgery. They're telling the first graders this. And so a lot of folks are saying, what is this? This is not the country I grew up in. So a lot of people feel like they're losing their country. And so the racial aspect is just one aspect of that, but it's there, and it's a powerful one. And I think some of these people are being conditioned and brainwashed to think that the fact that the white people will be a minority by 2050 is related to this decline in the manners and morals, that it's related to the decline in employment for ordinary people. And so there is this narrative that's grown up among the alt-right people. And that narrative is basically that they blame elite Jews for intentionally wanting to make these changes in American society, because they believe that the elite Jews think they can control the country better if they don't have any competition, and that the white majority, the non-Jewish white majority, would be the main competition for the elite Jews. So according to this alt-right theory, the elite Jews are intentionally trying to replace, they say, the white people. And at the same time, these elite Jews are poisoning the minds of everybody with pornography and selling drugs and this and that and the other. And so I think that's kind of the alt-right take on these things. And some of these people are really disgusting racists, and some of them are actually just kind of racialists who say, well, we don't have to say this race is better than that race or anything like that, but each race should be able to do its own thing. And, what race ever wants to be dispossessed in the land that it's taken over? So, I've been hearing from these people a lot. I get into fights with them all the time, as I've been a columnist at the UNZ Review. That's unz.com, which is a home for a whole bunch of these various kinds of weird alt-right people. Some of them are interesting and worth reading, and some of them are just crazy and nasty and show up in the comment section to troll you. but in any case, I do think that there's this wellspring of anger that's grown up about the way things are going. And part of that is driven by this fear of racial replacement.
So what do you say about, well, first, you just brought up so many issues. So why won't the people look into Trump's policies, especially under his policies with the sanctions with China? America's dependence has grown more on China because the trade is even bigger. The deficit is even larger with China after he enacted these so-called sanctions against China, and is making the American people pay more to buy stuff from China because America produces nothing.
Well, it might even be worse than that. Trump claims he's this big nationalist, and so he beats up on China instead of Russia, and of course he beats up on the Muslims, and that's supposed to make him a big nationalist. But as you say, his trade policies really backfired. He shot himself in the foot. America shot itself in the foot because the Chinese don't need us. We need them actually more than they need us. It's reached the point where it's going to be really tough to stop China from becoming the most powerful country in the world. And yet, of course, that's the job of the American leadership, is to try to stop them. So what are they going to do? So you know what? I think that Trump brought in these hardline anti-China guys. And what I think happened probably was a year and a half or a couple of years ago, they said, well, Mr. President, as you know, we've been waging small-scale biological attacks against the Chinese economy for the past 2 decades, and we have managed to take out their poultry supply and their pork supply with our CIA drones and other measures, dropping bird flu and swine flu on their country. And you may know that you did a SARS attack. We're trying to slow down their economic growth, Mr. President. They're growing 10% per year, and if this continues within a decade or two, we're toast. So we have this new project, and we'd like you to sign off on this, that we're going to escalate the biological attack. We have a new form of flu, which we think can be used to paralyze the Chinese economy. Would you mind signing here on the dotted line? And Trump's like, oh, yeah, I hate China. Sure, I'll sign. And that's probably where COVID came from.
Yeah. Well, I had sources that told me that prior to the so-called Wuhan incident, that there was a international training in that area with different troops, U.S. troops, other troops, and the Chinese believe that that's when the flu was brought to China, and the foreign minister even went so far to say it on Twitter about he believed that this came from the West and that it was a biological attack on the Chinese.
Yeah, the Chinese were actually saying that pretty loudly for a while, and now I think they've quieted down a little bit. Probably because they know that it's hard to win the propaganda battle because the Western media does dominate the media sphere. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence that this was a U.S. biological weapon. I think the strongest single piece of evidence is the report from ABC News, which was confirmed by Israeli journalists. I believe it was at Haaretz, the best paper in Israel, that in early October of last year, the U.S. military intelligence, defense intelligence agency warned America's allies in Europe and in Israel that there was a huge pandemic brewing in Wuhan, China, and they should take steps to protect themselves. So that was in early October of 2019. It wasn't until the end of December in 2019 that China knew that there was a problem in Wuhan. So how did the U.S. know 2 months early? the answer, as Ron Unz pointed out in his article on this, is that they probably knew for the same reason that the arsonist knows where the fire is going to break out.
Oh, so now, to be fair, and we'll go over to Joe Biden. What is your take on him, and how do you think, why do you think people think that he's going to be able to change the military industrial complex and to change U.S. policy? Because that seems far-fetched to me.
Yeah, Biden's not, it's bad enough that people voted for Obama and thought he was going to change anything, right? Remember how Obama was hope and change? Yeah. My wife actually fell for that. She'll probably kill me if she sees this. I've exposed her. I voted for Cynthia McKinney in 2008. Now that would have been change. But anyway, Biden, oh my goodness. Of all of the Democratic candidates, Biden was the most totally owned by Israel. Well, Biden and Harris were the two that were most owned by Israel, owned by the military-industrial complex, owned by all the forces of the worst elements of the oligarchy. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that those two got the nomination, and it looks like they've got the presidency now, unless Trump and Bibi Netanyahu start World War III or something, which is always possible. But yeah, no, there's no change coming with Biden. The only change, I actually look forward to one possible change that would personally benefit me in a certain respect, and that is that Trump being under the control of Netanyahu was very, very harsh on Iran. He waged really all-out war on Iran, two major acts of war, the murders of Iran's leading general and political figure, and then the murder of Iran's leading scientist. These are really acts of war, although, of course, it was the Israelis that did the recent one. And so, I've been banned from traveling to Iran. I've been traveling to Iran at least once a year since 2013, but for the past year and a half, I haven't been able to, because the FBI called and also visited people that I know and told us that if we go to this conference in Lebanon, sponsored by an Iranian NGO called New Horizon, we will be arrested when we return to the United States. So I can no longer go to Iran or to Lebanon or wherever these people have conferences and see my friends. Some of my best friends are these people in Iran that organize these conferences or are involved in these conferences, and I can't go see them anymore because of Trump being such a slave of Netanyahu. And under Biden, that could change. It's not a sure thing, because in the Obama administration, Obama actually was not such a bad guy in certain respects. Sure, he's a sellout and, an Oreo and all of that in a lot of ways, but his instincts were not really that bad. He was actually fairly bright and also, not a complete knucklehead. And so he saw how Netanyahu and the Israelis were playing America, and he didn't like it. And he ended up in a feud with Netanyahu. And that's why Obama pushed through the JCPOA agreement with Iran and was moving towards more somewhat cordial relations with Iran. Of course, the Obama administration and the American government was still trying to wipe out Iran and destroy the Islamic Revolution, but they were going to do it in a kinder and gentler way and not be quite as extreme about it. And so I was able to travel to Iran and go to conferences then. But now, since Trump's brought in Sigal Mandelker, this Israeli sanctions diva, to the Treasury Department to sanction Iran and basically threaten Americans who are friendly with these Iranian NGOs that will be imprisoned if we deal with these people. It's really been very annoying and obnoxious, and I hope that maybe that will end under Biden, but I'm not sure it will, because of all the people in the Obama administration, Biden was actually the one who was most open to listening to Zionists. So we'll see how that goes. That's the only positive thing I can even find in Biden becoming president. Other than that, it's all just more of the same, marching towards war, handing the technology companies and the oligarchs everything they want so they can enslave us and basically inject us with a mark of the beast. Artificial intelligence will follow us everywhere we go, follow every single product that's manufactured. They'll build robots to replace us. They won't need any more workers. We'll all be surplus people. And Bill Gates will probably then bring up pandemic 2 for depopulation. It's a really pretty grim future unless we wake up and stop this.
But I cannot forgive Joe Biden as vice president under Obama when they went in and destroyed the most prosperous nation on the Mediterranean, Muammar Gaddafi, and Libya. That to me, that was an unforgivable sin of his, because they did that to prevent the rise of Africa, the unification of Africa. And because they knew that Muammar Gaddafi was working with other African nations to have a single currency, a single market, and they wanted him removed, and they destroyed, they killed. They didn't just see, it's deeper than that with me. They didn't just depose him. They didn't just bomb the country. They didn't just balkanize the country. They raped him. A sitting world leader was raped with the barrel of a gun. They sodomized Muammar Gaddafi. And that doesn't sit well with me when it's concerned, because he was vice president at the time. And I just cannot get over that, because to me, it was to hinder the progress of Africa. And it was also, to, like I said, to prevent the unity and the economic emergence of Africa. And as soon as they got rid of Muammar Gaddafi, U.S. bases started arriving across the northern horn of Africa. And to me, that's recolonization. Also, to transition to the Middle East now. We've talked on Israel. There was a report, I don't know if you're aware of this, there was a report that a Mossad agent, or a high ex-Mossad agent, was assassinated in Tel Aviv. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I saw that. That's it was Veterans Today that broke that story. And I'm an editor at Veterans Today, although I just got into a big fight with them because they censored an article I posted there for the first time ever. I've been writing there for more than a decade, and they just censored the article. But anyway, yeah, that's very interesting. And it's, Iran has every right to retaliate. And how could they not retaliate when their leading scientist is murdered like that? But then how are you going to retaliate? It's not right to attack civilians. So they can't just go and murder some Israeli scientists. I mean, it'd be really easy to murder Israeli scientists. Anybody could do it. Just go to your local university and find an Israeli scientist, But that's not right. That's attacking civilians. That's terrorism. So obviously Iran would want to go after the evil people who were behind this operation. And so they may have done that. They may have got this Mossad chief of operations in Tel Aviv. That's what the reports say anyway.
And now Israel is trying to put out a cover story saying that it did not happen, but the video is clearly showing that there was an assassination that took place. And that's why I was asking you, maybe you had more on it than I did, because I wasn't. I can't confirm or deny it because my sources haven't told me anything to confirm or deny it. You don't have anything on that?
Well, I'm never 100% sure, but the editorial position at Veterans Today is that, yes, it really did happen. And when the Israelis say one thing and the Iranians say something else, normally I'll believe the Iranians.
Okay. So what do you think? Where do you think this is headed? Because, okay, we have the killing of Soleimani. We have the killing of another general that was not mentioned much about. And then we had the attempted assassination of another Iranian general, and we have the killing, the terrorist act of assassination of a nuclear scientist. This is a war by any other means, by any other words. It's a war because America is sanctioning it. They're tightening more sanctions. They're preventing medicine from coming into the country. They're preventing different kind of medical technology from coming into the country. They are trying to destroy Iran's ability to provide for its own people, and at the same time they're surrounding Iran with bases. They're threatening Iran, and they are attacking military and non-military people. Where do you think this is leading us?
Well, they've been trying to get a big war going with Iran for 20 years now. I think that was perhaps the real goal of 9/11. That is, 9/11 was probably sold to the American side of the leadership as a way to rally the people and change the overall kind of the attitudes, get rid of Vietnam syndrome, wake people up that there are these big threats in the world, give the government the power to do what they think they need to do, including surveil everybody, kill the people they want to kill, all this kind of stuff, get rid of all the oversight. I think 9/11 was designed for that, and perhaps to go into Afghanistan for American strategic purposes, and of course for drug dealer strategic purposes. So that's how it was sold to the American side of the leadership. But the Israelis infiltrated it And it was the Israelis, I believe, who blew up the Twin Towers. I think that was an Israeli operation primarily, done through their Kosher Nostra assets. And the Israelis then made 9/11 a much bigger provocation than perhaps some of the Americans involved had expected it to be. So what the Israelis wanted from 9/11 was to hijack the American military and destroy Israel's enemies in the region, as well as to launch this kind of long-term or permanent war on Islam on behalf of Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest threat to Israel in the region is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the world's only Islamic republic, which has been quite successful at being completely independent of the West and doing its own thing. And ultimately, the Zionists feel like Iran needs to be seriously taken down. In fact, they need regime change there. They need to overthrow the Islamic Revolution. So that was supposed to be the end game of the 9/11 wars. General Wesley Clark said that he ran into a neocon shortly after 9/11 who said the real purpose of all of this is to take out 7 countries in 5 years. And he listed the countries, and it was Sudan, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, and ending with Iran. So Iran was the number 7 and most important on that list. And so that's what the Israelis blew up the World Trade Center to do, was to hijack the U.S. into helping them destroy Iran. But what happened was that people like Clark and other Americans saw this and said, we just got into this horrible war in Iraq for Israel. People like Brzezinski were horrified by this. And they said, what are we doing here? What have we allowed the Israelis to do to us? And we're squandering our moral capital, our soft power, and a lot of our money and lives and treasure on this stupid project that Israel tricked us into doing. And so I think that they've been going after Iran since then. They tried to get something going in 2007. They set up a Persian Gulf of Tonkin incident in 2007, and were very close to pulling it off. They were going to sink an American ship in the Persian Gulf and blame it on Iran. A top advisor to the U.S. Admiral in Bahrain, Gwyneth Todd, blew the whistle on that to the State Department and barely escaped with her life and stopped a war. So the Israelis have been trying to drag us into a war with Iran forever. The Obama administration wouldn't let them do it. The Trump administration has let them do everything but. And so I think that's kind of where we are now. And we still have another month and a half of Trump, and maybe Trump and Netanyahu are thinking that a big war, that final big war with Iran, would be politically beneficial to both of them.
Yes, and I think most people don't understand that the assassination of Hafik Hariri, I think that's his name, from Lebanon. I was telling people when that took place, I say this is a move against Iran. Not so against Syria, but Iran, because that was the justification. They needed to put pressure on Syria to pull back its troops and its air defenses out of Lebanon, so that Israel would be a part of when they started this false flag in Syria, to weaken Syria and Lebanon, so that they could really focus more on Iran. Because Cheney said that when he was talking about, he said anybody can go to Iraq, but real men go to Tehran. And so a lot of people have short memories, and they don't realize that when America does something, she has planned this stuff out, and she's moving step by step into trying to, because they never forgot about what Gaddafi did when he threw the American base out when he took power in Libya. And for decades, they seized it, and they were angered about it. And what they did, they enticed him to come into the Western world. And once they verified he no longer had chemical weapons and his military wasn't a threat, then they moved in militarily to remove him. And I think all of these are chess pieces, and they're trying to move to make war on Iran, because they see Iran as the greatest threat to American and Israeli hegemony in the Middle East, because they want to control not only oil, but the pipelines also. And that's one of the reasons they went into Afghanistan also, And also because Afghanistan is the underbelly of China, Russia, Pakistan, India, and the former Soviet republics. What do you say about those things?
Yeah, I think you're right about all of that. I do think there is a divergence between the American interests and the Israeli interests, and the Israeli interests have usually been winning out to the detriment of the American interests, which is why the American empire is now on its last legs. These wars have not succeeded in advancing American interests, and quite the contrary. We've been bleeding blood and treasure and making ourselves look like idiots all over the world. And it's gotten worse and worse. And today, China is still growing close to double digits. They've recovered from COVID so much faster than the U.S. has. And the series of wars, supposedly for the U.S. empire, have been very counterproductive. However, they did save Israel. Israel was about to go out of business right before 9/11. Naomi Klein wrote in the Shock Doctrine about how Israel was not only losing Jewish immigrants, people were fleeing. The Jews were fleeing Israel in droves because of the suicide bombings, and that destroyed tourism. But then the dot-com bust in the late 90s destroyed Israel's economy. And so they were on their last legs. And what they did was right before 9/11, starting in early 2001, they put all their chips into anti-terror and security startups. And so when 9/11 happened, they hit the jackpot, and they moved in and colonized that industry.